Chapter 1, Section 5 is about adding and subtracting real numbers. So by the end of today, you should be able to add and subtract rational numbers. Tomorrow we'll be multiplying and dividing. All right, so we're going to look at a few different strategies for adding and subtracting. They're just strategies. You don't have to use every method that I tell you, but you should start moving towards doing this algebraically instead of drawing pictures or using number lines, even though that's always an option if you need the help. All right, so if you're using a number line, in case you're there, you want to start at the number that they give you first. So see how they started at 3, and then you count up 5 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that gets you up to 8. So we know 3 plus 5 equals 8. Okay, same works if you have negative numbers, still starting at number 3, because that was our first number, but a negative 5 means that I move to the left 5 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, telling us that 3 plus negative 5 is negative 2. Okay, this example C, we're starting at negative 3, and we're adding a positive 5. Positive means I move to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, telling me negative 3 plus 5 is actually positive 2. And last example, we start at negative 3, and we're adding a negative, so we're moving more left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, telling me that negative 3 plus negative 5 is negative 8. Okay, so negatives always move left, positives always move right. Okay, first vocab word is absolute value, which is just the distance between a number and 0, and it's always positive. You can never be a negative amount of steps away from something. So if you are at 2, you are 2 steps away from 0. If you are at negative 2, you're still 2 steps away from 0, just in the other direction. All right, if we are adding numbers that have the same sign, your answer is going to have the same sign as those numbers. So for example, if I add 2 positive numbers, I'm going to get a positive answer. If I add 2 negative numbers, I'm going to get a negative answer. Either way, you just add the numbers up, keep the sign. Add the numbers up, keep the sign. If I add numbers with different signs, I need to actually subtract those numbers, and then the answer will keep the sign of the greater absolute value. Okay, so if I have a negative 8 plus 10, I'm really going to do 10 minus 8, and that gives me 2. Then when I think absolute value, that means I'm just looking at the number. This 10 is actually bigger, and it was positive, so that means that my answer is going to be positive. Okay, second example, 18 plus a negative 19. I'm going to subtract those, and I always put bigger number on top when I'm subtracting. So I get 1, but then when I look at their absolute values, 19 is bigger, and that one was negative, so that means my answer is going to be negative. Okay, this is a good place to pause the video and try to answer these 6 questions by yourself, and then you can come back and work on this with me. All right, if I have negative 12 plus 7, the way that I just showed you how to do it would be to subtract. 12 minus 7 gives us 5, and then 12 is actually bigger than 7, so we're going to use that negative sign, and it's going to be negative 5. Another way to think about it is like teams. I think about baseball. The Minnesota Twins are my favorite team, so I'm going to count those as my favorite, as my positive numbers, because they are my favorite. And the New York Yankees are my least favorite team, so I'm going to count those as my negative numbers. Okay, so if I think about it, this means I have 18 Yankees players plus 2 more Yankees players. Well, I only have Yankees players, so my answer has to be Yankees, and 18 plus 2 is 20. Okay. Then this third one, I have 4.8 Yankees players, 9.5 Twins players. I actually have more Twins players, so my answer is going to be positive. But how many more do I have? There's where that subtracting comes in. So if I do 9.5 minus 4.8, I'm going to get a 4.7. All right, fractions. When I add or subtract fractions, I need to have a common denominator, even when they're positives and negatives. So I'm going to turn both of these into 12s, which means I need to multiply this one by 3, and I need to multiply this one by 2. My new problem will be 9 over 12 plus a negative 10 over 12. Okay, just like normal, I would keep my denominator the same, and then I'm going to look at my numerators. Okay, negatives are Yankees, positives are Twins. Okay, I actually have more Yankees players, so that's the sign that I'm going to use. And how many more do I have? Just one. So negative 1 over 12 is the answer to that one. Okay, you can choose whichever method you'd like for these last two, but the answer to this one is negative 2. And the answer to this one is negative 24. Opposites are numbers that are the same distance from 0. So 5 and negative 5, 10 and negative 10, and any number and its negative version. Okay, additive inverse means that when I add up a number and its opposite, it's always going to equal 0. If I add 10 plus negative 10, that equals 0. 5 plus negative 5, that equals 0. Any number plus its opposite adds up to 0. Our inverse property of addition. Okay, we're going to read, when you see this, it looks like negative a, we're going to call it the opposite of a. Okay, so this is telling me just what our last vocab word was, that if I add together a and the opposite of a, I will always get 0. So if a is 10, 10 plus the opposite of 10 will always give me 0. If a is negative 2, then I add the opposite of that, I'm going to get 0. That's the inverse property of addition. Okay, switching to subtracting real numbers. To subtract a real number, we add its opposite. Okay, sometimes when you get a nice easy one that you can do in your head, it'll be easier just to subtract it like normal. But if they're not that easy, we want to add the opposite. Okay, so for example, on the first one, negative 8 minus negative 13. Okay, instead of subtracting, I'm going to add the opposite. Okay, so this just became negative 8 plus 13. Once I turn it to an addition problem, all the rules that we just talked about are what we're going to use, all those addition rules. Okay, so I actually have more positive numbers, so my answer is going to be positive, and 13 minus 8 is 5. Okay, 3.5 minus 12.4, I can change it into adding the opposite. All right, so I actually have more negatives, meaning my answer is going to be negative. And how many more negatives do I have? 8.9. Okay, 9 minus 9, you don't need to change that to adding the opposite because you can figure out that 9 minus 9 is 0 on your own. If you don't need the little rules, you don't have to use them. These are just suggestions. Okay, 4.8, I'm going to add the opposite. So instead of having a negative 8.7, the opposite is a positive 8.7. When I add 4.8 and 8.7, I get 13.5. Okay, negative 3 minus negative 5, so I'm going to add the opposite. Okay, I turn this to adding, and I make that its opposite, and I get negative 3 plus 5, which means I have more positives, and it's 2 more positives. Okay, 1.5, add the opposite. Okay, I have more negatives. And how many more negatives? 7. Okay, hopefully that helps with your subtracting integers. That one's a tricky one and you have to be really careful. Okay, word problems. A reef explorer dives 25 feet to photograph brain coral and then rises 16 feet to travel over a ridge before diving 47 feet to survey the base of the reef. Then the diver rises 29 feet to see an underwater cavern. What is the location of the cavern in relation to sea level? Okay, so notice what I underlined. If I'm diving, those are like negative numbers because I'm going down. If I'm rising, those are my positives. So I'm just going to mark these because step 1 tells me that I have to write an expression to represent the situation. Okay, so sea level is 0. So we're starting at 0. Then we are diving 25 feet. Right here. We are rising 16 feet. Then we are diving 47 feet. Then we are rising 29 feet. Okay, there's our numeric expression. That's what we're doing. Okay, now I'm going to use integer rules to simplify this expression. Okay, so remember when we were talking about subtracting, we could really change it to adding the opposite. All right, so if I add all of these, let's see, I can start here if I want. So negative 25 plus 16 means I have more negatives. And how many more negatives? That's 9. Okay, so I have negative 9 with just this part. Then I'm going to add a negative 47. Okay, they both have the same sign, so I'm still negative. And 47 plus 9 is 56. Okay, and then I'm going to add 29, a positive 29. Okay, I have more negatives here, so my answer is going to be negative. But how many more negatives? 27. Okay, this means that I am at negative 27 feet by the time I get to the cavern that they're talking about. So this is 27 feet below sea level. A robot submarine dives 803 feet to the ocean floor. It rises 215 feet as the water gets shallower. Then the submarine dives 2,619 feet into a deep crevice. Next, it rises 734 feet to photograph a crack in the wall of the crevice. What is the location of the crack in relation to sea level? Okay, so again, we're starting at sea level, which is 0. And we're diving, which gives us negative, and we're rising. Okay, so I'm going to write out what we have. We dive 803 feet. We rise 215 feet. We dive 2,619 feet. And then we rise 734 feet. All right, I'm going to go through with another color here, and I'm going to change my subtraction to adding a negative. And then this is another way, different than the one we did last time. You could combine your negatives, so we know how many complete negatives that we have. So if I add 803 with 2,619, that means I have 3,422 negative feet. Then I'm going to put my positives together, and it's just simplifying this problem a little bit. 215 plus 734 gives us 949. Now I only have 2 numbers to look at, and I know that I'm adding a negative to a positive, but this negative is way bigger, so my answer is going to be negative. And then when I subtract them, because that's what I'm actually doing, when I add 2 different signs, I get 2,473 feet below sea level. You can choose whichever method works best for you, whichever one makes the most sense in your head. Okay, last word problem. Your friend says that since negative a is the opposite of a, the opposite of a number is always negative. Describe and correct the error in your friend's thinking. Okay, so if this means the opposite of a, does that always mean that the opposite of a number is going to be negative? The answer is no. If I give you the number -2, what is the opposite of -2? Just +2. Okay, so that's how we can correct their error. Just let them know the opposite is just the other side of the number line from that number. If you're starting at a negative, the opposite is always positive. If you're starting at a positive, the opposite will always be negative. Okay, if you have questions, make sure that you find me. Email, Google Classroom, whatever you've got to do. But this is your assignment, page 34, numbers 10 through 42 evens, numbers 43 through 51 all, and then your lesson.